Imagine you have one chance to become the master of the most powerful empire in the ancient world. Who would you choose to be, Rome's Augustus or China's emperor? Be careful what you choose, because behind these two titles lie deadly differences. It all begins with the word emperor itself. It has magically come to define all imperial rulers, yet it originates from the title for a Roman army commander, the imperator, and the rulers of Rome never called themselves emperor. Their true title was Augustus. So, what is the real difference between China's emperor, Huangdi, and Rome's Augustus? And what two profoundly different blueprints for power do they represent? Today, let's take 15 minutes to give a complete and in-depth answer.
When the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, created his title, his situation was vastly different from Octavian's. In the 3rd century BC, the conflicts of the warring states period in the East had finally ended. Yingzheng of the Qin state was the ultimate victor. He had unified China, and there were no rivals left to challenge him. The question he faced was, how could he define his own unprecedented status? At the other end of the world, the Roman Republic was disintegrating after a century of civil war. The assassination of Julius Caesar was the ultimate expression of the Roman elite's deep-seated fear of the title king, Rex. In this power vacuum, Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, defeated all his rivals to become the undisputed master of Rome. But his problem was far trickier. How could he wield absolute power in a city that despised dictators?
Yingzheng's situation was like founding a brand new corporation on a field of ruins. The old business model, the Zhou feudal system, was bankrupt. The market, the world, had been completely cleared. This gave him a blank slate to design a revolutionary new corporate structure and job title as he saw fit. Octavian's situation was more like a hostile takeover. He was seizing control of a long-established and famous company, the Roman Republic. He couldn't simply announce its dissolution without provoking a violent backlash from all the shareholders, the senatorial aristocracy. He had to preserve the company's original structure, traditions, and titles, at least on the surface, while silently transferring all real power into his own hands. This fundamental difference in origin was destined to send the two great empires of East and West down two completely different tracks.
A title is the business card of power. Yingzheng and Octavian gave two exemplary, yet diametrically opposed answers. Yingzheng realized that the title of king, Wang, had been severely devalued. He needed something entirely new. So he created Huangdi. This was a heaven-shattering move. He combined Huang and Di, two characters from mythology with demigod connotations, to declare that his achievements surpassed those of the mythical 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. It was a declarative title, loudly announcing the arrival of a new, absolute, and divinely sanctioned order. Octavian, on the other hand, knew that in Rome, king was political suicide. He needed a title that implied authority, but sounded nothing like a monarch. In 27 BC, the Senate granted him an honorific, Augustus. The meaning of this word was deliberately ambiguous and filled with religious overtones. The majestic, the venerable. It hinted at divine favor without directly claiming divinity. In public, Octavian preferred to call himself princeps, meaning first citizen.
These two titles are perfect encapsulations of their respective power systems. Huangdi was a declaration, announcing a new and absolute order. Augustus was a camouflage, using the cloak of tradition and piety to skillfully conceal the reality that absolute power had already arrived. The former was designed to explain power, the latter to hide it. This fundamental difference in political communication reveals the profoundly different cultural attitudes of East and West toward concentrated power at that moment in history.
Every ruler needs a reason for why they get to rule. The Chinese emperor's right to rule came from the mandate of heaven, Tianming. The emperor was called the Son of Heaven, Tianzi, the sole mediator between the heavens and the human world. This mandate was conditional. If a ruler became corrupt or incompetent, heaven would show its displeasure through natural disasters and social unrest, which gave the people the right to rebel. A successful rebellion was, in itself, proof that a new mandate had been established, leading to the recurring dynastic cycle. The power of the Roman Augustus, however, was a patchwork of traditional republican offices granted to him one by the Senate. The two most important were tribunician power, which gave him civil authority and made his person sacred and inviolable, and proconsular imperium, which gave him control over all Roman legions. His rule was legitimate because it followed the proper legal procedures, maintaining the fiction that the Republic was still functioning.
These two theories of legitimacy contain completely different system error correction mechanisms. China's mandate of heaven had a built-in, albeit violent, self-correction program, the dynastic cycle. The Roman system, however, lacked any formal procedure for removing a bad ruler. The Augustus's power was for life. The only method of correction was illegal, assassination or civil war. This didn't reboot the system. It simply replaced one strongman with another after a bloody struggle, shaking the empire's foundations each time. Therefore, the Chinese system was, paradoxically, more stable in the long run. It could absorb and legitimize revolutionary change. The Roman system was fragile, its legitimacy tied to the individual emperor and the loyalty of the army, making every succession a potential catastrophic system crash.
In theory, both supreme rulers held military command. But the crucial difference lay in the mechanisms through which they exercised that power and the forces that balanced it. The Chinese emperor's military authority was integrated into and checked by a vast civil bureaucracy. The emperor's orders had to be carried out by institutions like the Ministry of War, and the army's logistics were controlled by civilian officials. After the Song dynasty, the policy of elevating the civil and suppressing the military became state doctrine, designed to prevent the military from becoming an independent political force. In practice, the emperor's absolute power met enormous resistance from this system. In the 16th century, one Ming emperor wished to posthumously grant the title of emperor to his own biological father. He was met with ferocious opposition from the entire bureaucracy. The struggle lasted for years, and hundreds of officials were publicly beaten with staves, dismissed, or even died for their protest. This vividly illustrates that while the emperor's power was supreme, it was always constrained by a powerful ideological and institutional software. The power of the Roman Augustus was a naked military dictatorship, merely cloaked in republican law. His power did not derive from the law, but from his direct control over the vast majority of the legions. Roman soldiers swore an oath of loyalty not to an abstract state, but directly to the emperor himself, their sole guarantor of pay and bonuses. The most direct check on the emperor also came from the army. The Praetorian Guard in the capital, in particular, were notorious emperor makers and assassins. The year of the four emperors, in 68 to 69 AD, is a case in point. Only after Nero lost the army's support did the Senate dare to declare him an enemy of the state. Subsequently, powerful generals were hailed as emperor by their own legions and marched on Rome, sparking a bloody civil war. In this game, the Senate's resolutions were irrelevant. Whoever had the strongest army had the throne.
The Chinese system constrained the exercise of power. The emperor's military authority was tamed and bound by a complex system designed to maintain civilian rule and dynastic stability. The Roman system, however, constrained the survival of the ruler himself. A bad Chinese emperor might lead to the dynasty's fall generations later, but a Roman emperor who lost the army's support could be dead by morning.
For any autocracy, the most dangerous moment is the transfer of power. In China, the ideal was the principle of primogeniture, inheritance by the eldest son of the principal wife. This principle was intended to provide a clear rule to avoid conflict. In practice, it was frequently broken, leading to fierce court struggles. The founder of the Ming dynasty strictly followed this rule, but his own son, Zhu Di, usurped the throne from his nephew by force. To solve this dilemma, the Qing dynasty invented the secret succession system, where the emperor sealed the heir's name in a box kept behind the Justice and Glory plaque, to be opened only after his death. In stark contrast, Rome never developed a formal law of succession. It was a gamble that mixed bloodlines, army acclamation, and the famous practice of adoption. This practice led to the celebrated era of the 5 good emperors, where each ruler chose his successor by adopting a capable adult. However, this flexibility also brought constant instability. In 41 AD, after the Praetorian Guard assassinated Emperor Caligula, they found his uncle Claudius trembling behind a curtain, proclaimed him emperor on the spot, and forced the Senate to accept him. Here, power came from the sword, not the law.
China's system prioritized stability through a rigid rule at the cost of potentially getting an incompetent ruler. Rome's system prioritized flexibility to allow for merit at the cost of constant, violent instability. China sacrificed competence for predictability. Rome sacrificed predictability for the possibility of competence, and often got civil war instead. These two choices profoundly shaped the political destinies of their empires.
The supreme title also profoundly reshaped the ruler's private life. In matters of family, property, and children, the emperor and the Augustus followed vastly different rules. The Chinese emperor's family life revolved around one core objective: ensuring the continuation of the imperial bloodline. To this end, the empire established a complex harem system. The emperor had one principal wife, the empress, whose status was supreme. He also had a large, hierarchically ranked harem of concubines. A woman's rank determined her treatment, status, and the precedence of her children in the line of succession. The principle of primogeniture gave the empress's eldest son the primary right to inherit. This polygamous design maximized the production of male heirs, but was also a hotbed of court intrigue and power struggles. Financially, a distinction was made between the emperor's privy purse, neitang, and the state treasury, guoku. The emperor's personal expenses were paid from his private funds, sourced from imperial estates, tribute, and specific taxes. The state treasury funded the army and bureaucracy. However, this line was often blurry. In practice, the emperor held ultimate power over both. In times of crisis, an emperor might use his private funds to support the military. In times of peace, he might divert state funds for personal luxuries. The Roman Augustus lived under entirely different social norms. Roman law and tradition strictly enforced monogamy. The emperor could have only one legal wife, the empress, Augusta. While he might have mistresses or relations with slaves, any children from these unions were illegitimate and had no right to succession. This made producing a legitimate heir a significant challenge, and explains why adoption became such a critical tool for imperial succession. At the same time, as the emperor's sole legal partner, the empress could often play a more significant political role, acting as a counselor and a partner in power, like Augustus's wife, Livia. Financially, Rome had a clearer legal distinction between public property, res publica, and private property, res privata. The state treasury, aerarium, was, in theory, managed by the Senate. The emperor, meanwhile, possessed his own enormous personal fortune, patrimonium, derived from inheritance, like Augustus inheriting Caesar's vast wealth, the spoils of war, like the treasures of Egypt, and the tax revenues from his personal provinces. The emperor used this immense private wealth to pay the army, fund public works, and provide relief to the populace, inextricably linking his personal finances with the functions of the state. In effect, the emperor's private property was so large, it became the most important financial pillar of the empire, making the line between public and private property so blurred that it was impossible to distinguish between them and private incredibly subtle.
In the end, we see two profoundly different, yet equally consequential blueprints for absolute power. China's emperor was a cosmic autocrat. His legitimacy came from a sacred moral contract. He ruled through a vast elite bureaucracy, was constrained by ideology and historical tradition, and passed on his power through a theoretically clear line of succession. His very title was a solemn declaration of a new world. Rome's Augustus was a pragmatic military strongman. His legitimacy was built on a legal fiction and the reality of military force. He ruled through a network of personal power while preserving the shell of the old system, was constrained by powerful interest groups and the threat of assassination, and passed on his power through ad hoc, unstable methods. His very title was a clever disguise for a new reality. To summarize with a final metaphor, the Chinese imperial system was like an ancient, deep-rooted tree. The rise and fall of dynasties were like the life and death of its trunk, but its vast root system, the bureaucracy, the mandate of heaven, Confucian thought, endured. After an old trunk rotted away, the roots would always sprout a new one. The Roman imperial system was like a magnificent building constructed without a single blueprint. Each new emperor was a new architect, struggling to keep the structure from collapsing. He depended on the stability of the foundation, the army, and the acquiescence of the tenants, the Senate, knowing that any structural failure could lead to total ruin. These two systems represent two of history's most enduring and influential solutions to the problem of absolute rule. One founded on cosmic morality and bureaucratic procedure, the other on legal fiction and military reality. Their profound differences in origin, legitimacy, and the boundaries of power not only shaped the destinies of their respective empires, but for the next 2,000 years would define the very vocabulary of political civilization in the East and the West.